Welcome everyone to this special live Q&A on National Citizens Alliance. I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Ricardo Duchesne with me today. He's author of Canada in Decay and a number of other books. He's also working on a new book right now. He's one of our I'd say he's probably our most courageous, brave academics in Canada. And like the NCA, he's smeared by the mainstream media. He's blacked out, but we have him here today with us. And just to let everyone know, we did a presentation with Professor Duchesne in St. John, New Brunswick, about a month ago. And what we're going to do today is follow up from that presentation. And you can view that presentation on our Facebook Live videos. Also, you can view them on our YouTube page at National Citizens Alliance as well. But we're going to build off that presentation today and dig deeper into this globalist agenda that is taking over our country. I have about 10 questions I'm going to go through that's going to allow us to dig deeper. And then we're going to shift it to you. We want to hear your comments and questions. So the latter half of this Q&A today will be about you and your comments and feedback. And Professor Duchesne and myself will do our best to answer your questions and to give feedback on your comments. So this is going to be an exciting evening. And welcome, Professor Duchesne. Thank you for making time for this.
Okay, thank you for having me here. I'm glad to be speaking to Canadians, which is an opportunity, as you know, that is not afforded to people that question the whole diversity program. So it is great to have this chance to explain my views.
That's fantastic. And, we, National Citizens Alliance, shares almost all of your views. And it's great that there's academics like you in Canada. And it shows a lot of integrity on your part because, as you mentioned in your book, Canada Decay, all the funding, government funding, everyone, is going to these academics that are pushing multiculturalism, that are pushing diversity, that are pushing globalism, that are pushing sexual identity, progressive theory, and all that. That's where all the funding is going from the federal government. And Professor Duchesne didn't lower himself to go after that funding. He stuck to his integrity.
Right.
So
I started as a typical leftist academic, and I was a leftist as a undergraduate student and a graduate student and during my first years of teaching. But gradually, as I kept thinking, and in fact, engaging in what they call critical thinking, I kept thinking critically about the issues. It led me to the position that I am today. And I reached this position because it was a position that made most factual sense. It was the most rational position, and it was the most ethical position to reach. But once you reach this kind of views, they cut you off. I mean, I was getting grants before, I was getting invitations, and the moment I reached this kind of perspective, they cut me off.
They also malign you.
Right.
Just do a search of Ricardo Duchesne on some of the search engines, everyone, and he's completely maligned like National Citizens Alliance. No different.
Yes.
But he's speaking the truth just like us. So we're going to get into this now, everyone. We're going to start with some basic elementary stuff that you as Canadians need to understand. So the first thing we're going to look at is globalism versus globalism ideology. And Professor Shane astutely discusses this in his book, Canada Decay. But can you clarify today the difference between globalization and globalism ideology?
Yes, I make that distinction in the book, and it is an important distinction to make because the establishment wants to portray us as people who are backward, irrationally out of touch with the realities of the modern world economy. And they say that we don't believe in globalization. So my argument is, actually, we do believe in globalization. We don't believe in globalism. So we have to make that distinction very clear. Globalization really means that the world is economically interconnected in multiple ways, to trade, through communications, transportation, and all sorts of other ways. And we are all for that. Japan is a country that is thoroughly globalized. Their economy really depends on sweeping deep interconnections with the rest of the world, yet they're not globalists. So what do I mean by that? Well, they retain their sense of national identity, their sense that they are a people within this territory, and they wish to preserve themselves as a Japanese people. They don't have open borders, whereas across the Western world, and only the Western world, we have this notion that, oh, if you want to globalize, if you want to interact with the world, you have to have open borders and allow millions upon millions of immigrants to arrive to your lands. So what we are arguing is that we don't need to have millions and millions of immigrants arriving into Canada, and yet we can still be very open when it comes to trade, when it comes to technology transfers, when it comes to traveling, and all sorts of other things. So this is just an act of deception on their part to say, oh, we want to lock the world out. No, we don't. We just want to have a sense of national identity, and we want to put Canadians first.
Yeah, very good, very good. Yeah. And this ties into the foreign aid flowing out of our country. Billions and billions and billions, right? Professor Duchesne. Another thing I want to point out, Trudeau's going to NATO, Professor Duchesne, and I couldn't help commenting on his tweet today. And he was saying how he looks forward to helping Canadians and the rest of the world and bringing peace and security to their countries. And so it's a complete globalist agenda.
Oh, yes. It is an argument that has many dimensions to it. Another aspect to this globalist agenda is that Canada somehow has a responsibility to the world as much as it has to its own citizens. Our argument is, no, you first have a responsibility to your people, and then, of course, the world matters. The world outside matters. You don't want to see wars. You don't want to see people being victimized and so on. But first, your priority must be your own people. And when you fix your own home, to use that analogy, everything else follows from that. If you have a messy home and you don't take care of your own children and your own family, how can you talk about taking care of other people? So that's one of the arguments that we make, and I make in Canada in Decay.
Yeah, and that's something we support, and we see that all the time, Professor Duchesne. This globalist rose-colored glasses, we're going to save the world, we're going to help all these needy people in the world. Meanwhile, our veterans are left behind, our seniors are left behind, our homeless. It's completely hypocritical, everyone.
Yes.
Yeah, and you know what we say, Professor? The federal government shouldn't be a world charity. For all those lefties out there who have bleeding hearts, why don't you put up your own money and fund legitimate charities around the world? Don't rely on the federal government.
Yes, it's out of control. I mean, I think that we have all kinds of needs. Speaking of the natives as well, the indigenous peoples, as they're called, I mean, how can you be talking about people from other lands and then seriously saying that you want to take care of the people that are here? So, yeah, that's another argument, and there are many others as to what is wrong with globalism. Globalism really amounts to the idea that we don't have a nation. We are just citizens of the world. And other people from all over the world are citizens of Canada. And I think that's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it's absurd. And would you link one world government in with globalism agenda?
Well, yeah, there are people who talk about one world government. I wouldn't put it like one world government because in reality, what is going on is that we have these international agencies like the UN, people like George Soros, and he financing all sorts of groups that are pushing for this idea of one world government. But it isn't quite that they want to have just one government ruling over the world. They really just want the citizens of Western nations to think of themselves as members of a world government, in the sense that there are these international agencies and authorities that should interfere and should dictate to Canada and to the United States and Australia how they should govern themselves. So in that sense, yes, you can talk about one world government.
Okay, so we're going to shift from there, everyone. If you have any questions about this topic, we will open it up to questions about halfway through. So right now we're going to shift to another issue, and this is something you bring up in your book, Professor Duchesne, the idea of an abstract individual. And I'm wondering if you could elaborate on that and how this applies to the globalist agenda that is taking place in Canada.
Yes, it may seem complicated, but essentially what is going on in all Western countries is that we think of the people from France, from England, from Greece, from Canada as abstract, denationalized individuals. That is, individuals who can only be defined by universal values, the beliefs that they have. And these universal values happen to be values for humanity. So that's an abstraction, because you're abstracting Canadians from their own history, their own ancestry, and their own place in Canada. Like, you talk to any Canadian that was born here and that has families that go back for a long time. They're not abstract. Their identity is intrinsically connected to having been born, let's say, in Montreal, to having families that settled there a long time ago, to having attended Christian churches when they were young, having gone to this school or that school and this neighborhood and these friends. That's what makes you a real, substantial individual and gives you a sense of identity. But when you talk of individuals as members of the world, as people who have human rights in their heads, you're abstracting them, you're separating them from their actual rooted place of birth and the place where they grew up and where their friends are and their families are.
Okay. Would they be globalist individuals? Is that fair?
Yes, it's to be a globalist, you have to abstract yourself from your actual identity as a member of a particular nation with a particular language. You're saying, I'm not really Canadian. I'm not really a person that was born in Montreal, but I'm someone that is everywhere, that speaks and cares for everyone, just as much as I care for my own people. In fact, it may mean not really caring about your own people because you're so concerned with foreigners, as is happening today in the United States with this issue about the illegal immigrants. The Democratic Party wants to act as if people that are foreigners, they're illegals, are just as important as Americans. And that's not the way it should be. That is, you're abstracting yourself from the people that are in your own neighborhood that you should care about. In reality, human beings show true caring when they talk about concrete, particular individuals that they know, that are near to them, that are in their own neighborhood, not when they say, I love humanity. That's an abstraction. You can't really love humanity. You can only love family members and individuals that you know. That's why when there is like something bad happens in the neighborhood, you immediately care because you go, I know that guy, or oh, that guy just lives across and his house got burned down. And it concerns you because you can identify to them. They're concrete individuals. They're not abstractions. But the globalists want to act like we're just free-floating individuals with no home, no homeland, and so on.
Yep, fair enough. Yeah, and we'll take questions on that later, everyone. We're going to shift now. In your presentation in St. John, New Brunswick, was about a month ago. You did make it very clear. You predicted and said that the rest of Canada, if this globalism agenda continues, will become like Toronto. And could you elaborate what is happening in Toronto? And also, another thing is, could you tell us what Toronto is going to look like in 10, 20, 30 years, even from now?
Well, this is my book, Canada in Decay. Do I have it in the right? Yeah, right there. I discussed that issue about the demographics in Canada and also in Vancouver, Toronto, and other big cities. So, as I recall, by the year 2031, 2032, which is in a few years from now, the Euro-Canadian population in Toronto will be something like in the low 30s, like 31, 32%. Right now, they're below 50%. So within a few years, they're going to be not even 1/3. They're going to be below 30%.
Wow.
Or I mean, just above 30%. So that's an incredible statistic. Another projection is that in Vancouver, only 2 out of 5 citizens of that city will be Euro-Canadian. So when you look at all the major cities and you see that within less than 2 decades, they're going to be close to just 1/3 or even below, then that's the demographic reality. And if you think you have seen everything now in terms of the continuous attacks on our history, the continuous attacks on prime ministers as racist, the taking down of statues, the fact that Canadian history is barely taught, you will be very surprised in a few years. There's going to be a complete revision of Canada's history, a celebration of people that are not Euro-Canadians, and a constant, continual condemnation of everything that is Euro-Canadian. Euro-Canadians, if you don't speak for your own history, for your own identity, no one will. And what they're saying is that it is almost illegal. It's almost unacceptable morally for you to speak well of your own history. And this just doesn't make any sense. So they want to put you in a corner. So you shut up and you don't say anything. And Euro-Canadians have to say, you know what? I have a sense of pride and a sense of dignity. I care for our past prime ministers. And for all their flaws, they were part of creating a nation that many other people want to come to. So let's be real. If Canada was so bad, if Euro-Canadians were so bad, how come so many people from the world would immediately come here more than they already are? If you invited them from all over the world, they will just jump in and come in. So it's all nonsense. I mean, if it's so bad, people wouldn't come. So how could the leftists and the establishment and the corporations be right to say that Canada was a bad nation, racist, and these guys are going to make it better? They wouldn't come here. So Euro-Canadians have to realize that other people are saying by coming here that your nation is great. Therefore, why don't they say, Euro-Canadians, yes, it is great. And you know what? We want to preserve it. We don't want to give it away. So I think this is important when you look at the demographic reality of Toronto, to be aware that the lower in numbers Euro-Canadians are in Canada, the more threatened they are going to be, and the more the attacks will increase, unless they stand up and speak with pride and dignity, because then people will respect them. Right now, they're going to say, oh, you're just a racist. But deep down, they actually respect you.
Yeah, excellent point. I just want to put this in context. In 1960, Professor Duchesne, Euro-Canadians comprised 97% of Canada's population. 97%. And if we continue, everyone, on this trajectory, as Professor Duchesne outlined, like in Toronto, Before 2100, Euro Canadians will be less than 20%. Visible ethnic minorities will be 80% of the population. So you could see the direction of the globalist agenda. It's completely undermining our country, turning us into a globalist village. So I'm going to turn here now, and I know you touched on this. Maybe you can elaborate a little further, Professor Duchesne. How is this globalist agenda in Canada tied to the United Nations and other globalist institutions?
Well, it kind of is similar to the point about one world government. The UN right now is constituted by countries from all over the world. The vast majority of these countries are not European, and they have their own interests, and they keep pushing for their own interests. And they employ the concept of human rights, which is actually a Western created concept, to advance their own interests. One of the things they like to do is to hold the West culpable for not following human rights precepts. Never mind that in their own countries, they violate those rights continuously. But they hold the West to a higher standard because the West itself blames itself for past imperialism, for whatever they did in the past. So they know that. So they keep hammering and trying to push this human rights agenda on the West to make Westerners feel, oh, you're violating the rights of other people when you don't let illegals in, or when you don't accept enough refugees, or when you think in a discriminatory way about accepting people from this or that country. They keep bringing up this issue of human rights. So the UN, in many ways, embodies this notion of a world government and embodies this idea that European peoples and Euro-Canadians are obligated to follow universal principles that people are interpreting any which way they can from outside. And what I mean by universal principles are the principles of the UN, the universal rights that are embodied in its own charter. So these universal rights, which I discuss a lot in my book, have done a lot of damage to the West because now it's almost as if a human being from another country has the same rights as a Canadian because that person is a human, therefore that person has rights. And if that person has rights, then you kind of think, oh, well, they have the right to be in Canada, the right to get what Canadians get because they are human beings, and human beings have human rights. So it's really ridiculous because in reality, you cannot have a nation unless you differentiate between the rights of your citizens, the rights of people that are from Canada, and people from outside. They cannot have the same rights. But the idea of human rights eliminates that distinction. And all Western countries are now dominated by this concept of human rights, and lawyers and academics keep hammering it and pushing it, saying, oh, you got to do this. You got to accept so many refugees from here, or you got to accept so many economic migrants from there. It is your human rights duty to do that. And Westerners fall for that. They go, oh, yes, like, you know, they're human beings just like we are. Yeah, they are human beings just like we are, but that doesn't mean that they're equal to the people that are here simply because we have rights that are for citizens, that are not for all human beings.
Excellent point. This can be elaborated or just punctuated on the fact that as soon as someone crosses the border, Professor Duchesne, they have rights in our country.
Yeah.
And it's the same concept, isn't it? They have rights to our healthcare, to our welfare systems. Look at all the illegal migrants. As soon as they cross the border, they have rights.
Right. And that is an extension of the idea of human rights. Something that is a complicated discussion that I have in my book of how it was that slowly and gradually the citizens of Western countries were seen as individuals that don't really have special rights as citizens, but simply rights that belong to all human beings across the world.
Okay.
And so if a person that's not a Canadian who lives in Africa has human rights, and human rights is what matters, and that person doesn't have a job or is not eating properly, then a Canadian somehow is obligated to extend Canadian citizenship to that person so that they can fulfill their human rights. And this is what has happened.
That's ultimate globalism, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that's what's happening, everyone. We can all see it, all the money flowing out, all this rose-colored glasses. Oh, we got to help them. We got to help those people. We got to bring more people in. It's insane. Anyways, I want to shift now to our next question. This is about globalists like George Soros. You know, we already know that he met with Justin Trudeau at the Davos Economic Forum.
Yeah.
Trudeau naively bragged about it. We know for a fact that George Soros met with the current foreign minister, Freeland, over lunch. We know that the federal government has collaborated with George Soros on some refugee sponsorship programs, everyone. So our question to you, he's only one globalist, wealthy globalist, but what kind of impact, can you go deeper into what's going on in our federal government with these globalists?
Yes, what I would say about George Soros is I would ask listeners to simply Google organizations funded by George Soros. And there is a particular site that lists them all. And there are many, many of them. And when you look at what these organizations are about, they are always leftist organizations. And many, many of them are for open borders for Western societies and only Western societies. George Soros' group is called the Open Society. That idea of an open society, he took it from a particular philosopher known as Karl Popper, who was writing just after the Second World War. And what he meant by open society, this guy Popper, was that Western societies are unique because we have liberal freedoms. And I'm all for that. I believe that Western societies are special because we have always valued the rights of individuals and the freedom of individuals to engage in all kinds of discussions as we are doing here. But what Soros did with that concept is something different. He took it to mean that Western societies, because they are liberal societies that believe in freedom, therefore they should be open, freely available to everyone in the world who wants to come in. This is what he started saying by it. And you see this among many liberals. They began to change the actual meaning of many Western ideas to mean something else. And this is one of the biggest transformations of what freedom means initially for Western peoples. It has now come to mean that you're not really a believer in freedom unless you have masses of immigrants coming in, which is ridiculous. You should have a right to say, no, I'm free, and that's why I am free to say that I only want so many immigrants per year. And I'm also free to say that I don't want any of them. As Japan is a democratic nation, Japan has a free press, but Japan is free to say that we don't want open borders. But this guy, George Soros, just twisted the whole thing around so he can confuse and make Westerners feel that having open borders is a liberal thing. It's not. It's a mandated, enforced, controlled program imposed from above by globalists like him, who are very wealthy and finance all these crazy leftist groups that hate the West. They hate white people, many of them do, and they want to diversify everything because they think that if you have a white nation, the whiter it is, the more Nazi-like it is. Never mind that nation like Finland, Norway, Denmark, now they're getting lots of immigrants there, but these nations have all the freedoms you could think of. Welfare programs, you name it, they have it. Nothing like Nazi Germany, but they want you to think, oh no, if you don't become diversified, if you don't let millions of Africans come in, oh, you're just a Nazi supporter. I mean, it's ridiculous. So when he uses the concept, George Soros, we have to attack him at the intellectual level. When he uses the concept of open borders, he's just trying to deceive, not open borders, open society. He's trying to deceive everyone that he's for our open society. He's not. He's for a closed, diversified society in which you're not allowed to criticize him.
Yeah, good point. Good point. And he's not the only one, everyone. There's other globalists out there. He just happens to be more in the public light.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's definitely more. Just go through the World Bank, all through the UN, in the EU bureaucracy. Look in the federal government. There's all kinds of globalists there, or at least pro-globalists, eh?
Oh, they're
yeah, they're everywhere, everyone. It's not just George Soros. I just want to shift now, because you did talk about this in St. John, New Brunswick, about religion and culture. And then we just had the recent decision of the Supreme Court deciding that Trinity Western University law students should not be permitted to practice law in Canada because of their Christian views. Professor Duchesne, how does this decision tie into this globalist agenda?
Well, first, I would direct listeners to an article that was just posted in the Euro-Canadian blog, or the Council of European Canadians. And it's an article by Grant Havers. He happens to be a professor at Trinity Western, and he published this article somewhere else, but I reposted it in the Council of European Canadians. And Grant Havers makes a very good argument, and that's why I posted it, as to what is wrong with this decision. And basically what he says is that what we have here is a situation in which the LGBTQ, group is everywhere. I mean, you cannot say it's one group. It's just an ideology that is now being imposed across the board. It's saying to this university, you cannot produce legitimate lawyers unless you accept LGBTQ students, which is a way of saying that we will not allow you to have your own way of thinking. You have to think like we do. You have to be for us. So that's a contradiction, because the LGBTQ people are saying that they want to be included and to be accepted elsewhere in society, and for people not to be intolerant towards them. But here they are being intolerant to really one of the very, very few Christian colleges in Canada that are saying, look, you're not obligated to apply to this college. You may even keep that as your private life. We just don't want to openly be endorsing this ideology that is being rammed down through everyone's throat about, human sexual issues and what is a marriage and so on. We're a traditional college. That's very clearly stated in our own mission statement. And we have all kinds of different outlooks being taught in this college. We're not hammering down just the Christian point of view. This guy, this Professor Grant Havers, for example, is a very sophisticated intellectual. He's not just some Christian evangelical person who uses the university as a podium to express the same Christian view, but he articulates and expresses what he believes in a very careful way. So this LGBTQ thing is just, you can sense it, that you're being pushed against the wall and being told you either believe in what we think or we won't tolerate you. In the name of tolerance, they say this. So I would urge readers to read this article because he expresses it better than I just did here. It's a very well articulated article.
Excellent. We will repost it as well. Thank you for mentioning that, Professor Duchesne. And you just touched on it. So, in this globalist realm, everyone of claiming tolerance and inclusion, but if you get below it, it's really promoting intolerance. It's really promoting less diversity, less inclusion, while it's attacking Christianity, the founding religion of Canada, and by extension, it's attacking all Canadians. Would you argue, Professor Duchesne?
Oh yes, I mean, Christianity.
So that's the globalist agenda in a nutshell, isn't it? Like this case, what they're doing. It's just so intolerant, and yet they're claiming tolerance, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, the Christianity is a major component of Canada's identity for the very simple reason, to start with, that when you look at the prime ministers, when you look at the inhabitants of Canada who created this nation, the settlers, the pioneers, they were Christians. You can't get away from that. Our institutions were Christians. Our high schools were Christians. They were called Catholic or Protestant. And so that's an inescapable historical reality of Canada. But now they are kind of pretending that it was not a part of Canada, but it's an intrinsic component of Canada. So when you say, Canada or the Canadians that were here a long time ago, they created a pretty good nation. You have to say, yeah, and guess what? They were Christian. Well, you got to bring that into the equation. And these Christians happen to have created a very good nation. I say this as someone who is not a practicing Christian, but I respect Christians and I respect the role of Christianity in Canada. So it's not me defending it as a deep believer. I am a Catholic, but to be honest, I don't go to church. But I respect Christianity. I respect the role that they have played in history. And I think Christians sustain key values to a civilization, whether it is marriage, family, moral integrity. So in that sense, yes, I value Christianity a lot.
Yeah, unfortunately, the globalists, the left, the radical left, all they can point out is some of the bad parts of our history. They never point out all the good, right? They just focus on the residential schools and the oppression of First Nations and right. And then they peddle the lie that we're a country of immigrants, which
right.
Yeah,
it's just ridiculous what they're.
It is.
Yeah.
And Professor Duchesne's done a lot of work on that issue. We're not going to get too much into that today, everyone. But his central argument is that Canada was primarily founded by pioneers and then settlers, and that during pre-Confederation, there was actually a net outflow from the country. But all these paid academics, everyone, and the government is peddling a myth and a lie that we're a country of immigrants. So you make up your own minds. But we agree with Professor Duchesne. It just makes a lot more sense. And this is all about undermining our heritage, our culture, our identity. I'm going to get to a key issue, which everyone's going to be quite interested in, Professor Duchesne. This is becoming a big issue in our society, but I'm wondering what, in your opinion, what role does Islam, radical Islam for that matter, play in this globalist agenda in Canada? And we could see what's going on in Europe with the problems with radical Islam, like all the no-go zones and the Sharia creep in Europe, and all the all the the rape gangs that are here now, all the molestation of women. So what role is this playing, if any, or is it just part of the mass immigration? It's just a byproduct.
Well, it is a kind of peculiar situation with Islam, because Islam is not really globalist and it's not liberal. And yet the liberals and the globalists are using Islam to push their agenda. And so you have to be aware of that you're in a kind of paradox. How is it that leftists, who are supposed to be for gay rights, LGBTQ, and so on, have aligned themselves with Islamic peoples? Why that coalition? Islamic people in France, in Britain, they vote for leftist parties. Why do they vote for them? Well, because they like the promotion of diversity, the promotion of multiculturalism. Multiculturalism allows them to grow, to nourish themselves, to retain their identities, while they are not obligated to do likewise for any other culture. So they say, yes, of course we welcome multiculturalism. It's good for us. So that's why they vote for leftist parties. So why do leftists then form coalitions or are so concerned about Islamic peoples and barely ever want to criticize them? Well, because the left sees them as weapons of diversification, ways to bring diversity, religious diversity, a way to say that the US, that France is not really Christian. How could it be Christian? How could you call it Christian? We have lots of Muslims here. And now they're saying, and they're lying about it, oh, well, France had a few Muslims in the 1700s, therefore Islam was a critical part of French history. They're making ridiculous arguments like that. Just because they found some bones from some person that came from the Near East, they say, oh, well, look at that. There is this presence of it doesn't make any sense. And in reality, Islam did not play a role demographically in the history of Europe other than during the early Middle Ages, when they took over most of Spain. Clearly at that point, they had an impact on Spain and played a role in Spain. But eventually they were kicked out, and there was no major Islamic population anywhere in the West. It's insignificant. So now only recently has it become significant in some countries. But they want to say, no, it has always been significant, so that you then take it as natural, as something that is part of Western history, when it is not. So yeah, in that sense, the left is using Islam as a weapon to force diversity onto white people, to force diversity and the idea that Christianity is not central to the West onto white people. And they are rewriting the history and lying about it.
Yeah. We actually saw that in the greater Europe, right out of Brussels, saying Islam was on par with Christianity in the formation of Europe.
Yeah.
They were even saying that, everyone.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Are you worried, Professor Duchesne? Because I know there's a growing number of Canadians who are worried about radical Islam, the spread of Sharia. They're worried about what they see going on in Europe. Do you share that worry for future generations? And looking at fertility rates of these groups, where they're having 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 kids, and they're just spreading. And does that worry you?
Oh yes, if you're living in Britain, if you're living in France, in Belgium, then you should be very worried about Islamization. You have heard probably that the major name of babies is Mohammed in quite a few cities across Europe. Now, I would say that in the case of Canada, in the case of the United States, Islamization is not yet a major thing. And it could also be a distraction from the fact that we have other groups that are taking over. In the case of Vancouver, Richmond, BC, and across our universities, we have Chinese that are a major factor in the transformation of Canada. So in my view, we should not lose sight of that. So Islam, of course, is a big problem because it crystallizes the whole issue, because they openly declare that they're not pro-Western. They openly declare that they are for Islam on your face. And so in that sense, it's very good to awaken people, to tell them, look, this is a reality that's coming to our lands. But at the same time, you know, you look at Vancouver, where there are not many Muslims, and at least the way I see it is Vancouver is undergoing a radical transformation, is losing and has lost a lot of its British identity, which is really a major loss, because the British who created that city have to be proud. I mean, it's called British Columbia, the province. They must be proud of that and cherish that heritage, rather than just relinquish it and say, oh no, well, you know, British Vancouver looks to the Pacific, therefore it's going to become Asian. It doesn't have to become. So we have to look at those other realities and not just get caught up with Islam.
Yeah, that's a good point, everyone. It doesn't have to be. This is all being implemented. There's plans in place that have been going on for decades. If you read Professor Duchesne's book, Canada Decay, he shows the progression from year to year, decade to decade, that this is just picking up steam, everyone. It doesn't matter which establishment government gets in. They're all just tinkering away at this globalist agenda, pushing more and more the envelope.
Yeah.
And Islam is being used, as Professor Duchesne says, to divide us, to distract us, to further erode Christianity, our identity, our heritage, our culture. Is that fair?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to shift. And please ask any questions. We're going to be turning to you very shortly. We just got a few more quick questions that we want to make sure get covered. But I'm going to shift to this now, Professor Duchesne. I know you touched on it, but you might want to add a little bit more. In 2015, Justin Trudeau, he called Canada the first post-national state. And he said he didn't know what our identity was. He said there's no mainstream identity.
Yeah.
Is that like textbook globalist right there?
Oh, yes. It is. Yes, it is taking the whole idea that Canada and all Western nations are nations based purely on values that are universal values. You're taking it to its extreme. I have a chapter in my book, the last chapter, in which I address this issue of post-national state that Justin Trudeau's, that's the way he characterized Canada. And what it means is this. With his father, Pierre Trudeau, he accepted the fact that Canada is a civic nation, that it is based on liberal values. These liberal values, everybody knows, are Western. So Pierre Trudeau is basically saying, okay, so we are multicultural, but even multiculturalism is a Western value. Canada is a Western nation. So Justin Trudeau is basically saying, well, no, saying that Canada is a Western nation is still too ethnocentric. It's still not, should I say, diverse enough. It's not multicultural enough. If Canada is going to be really multicultural, then it cannot identify itself as Western. It cannot say that liberal values are Western. These values have to be seen as the values of the world, the values of humanity. Pierre Trudeau at least would say, because it was just so obvious, that liberalism is an ideology that came from the West. And as I said before, I like liberal values because I believe in freedom of the press. I believe in equality under the law. I believe in a proper judiciary and separation of powers. I believe in representative government. But that has been totally transformed now, as I was saying before, to mean that you have to have open borders, that you have to accept everybody from around the world. So Justin Trudeau is kind of saying, oh, well, we radicalize liberalism so much that it's not really Western, that we don't really have Western values. Well, we have our world global values. And in a sense, he's being consistent, because if you are going to make Canada totally multicultural, why in any way, shape, or form identify it as a member of a Western civilization? Why? Why not as a member of the Muslim, Hispanic, Hindu, Confucian world? So he's taking it to his logical conclusion. We don't have a national identity. We don't have any identity. Canada is what the immigrants make it. And the immigrants come from all over the world. And they're making a whole new Canada that is so much beautiful, is so much better, because people from Hindu lands are just great. Look at India, is such a great nation. When they come here, they just improve our nation and make it just, it's all insane. When you bring them here, they're going to make everything better, even though they all want to come here because it's terrible where they're coming from. But that's their logic of the reasoning of these people.
Yeah, and that's only looking at India. You haven't looked at Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Iran, right? On and on. Countries in Africa, right? Yeah. And
it's just
I would contend, Professor Duchesne, that Trudeau is really a globalist at its core. And on the surface, he pretends to be a liberal, but the core is a globalist.
Oh yes,
yeah, fundamentally. So
I discussed this in my book, that how liberalism has been manipulated and taken over by the left, to the point that no one wants to call themselves liberal today. But at its core, what liberalism used to mean, you would agree with it. You want to live in a nation that your rulers represent the will of the people. That's the nation you want, right? The will of the citizens of your nation, not the will of people from around the world. But they have distorted its meaning so that we can even... The same with conservatives. I mean, you look at conservatives in Canada, they are all for the very same ideas.
Yes.
They're for a global world order. So, all these terms have been radically transformed.
Yeah, 100%, everyone. It's all being radically reformed. And there is an attack, everyone. I think everyone knows today, there's an attack on Canadian nationalism. And that's why the reference to a post-national state. It means there's no Canadian nationalism. And Professor Duchesne went further. There's no Canadian values. There's no Canadian identity. There's no Canadian heritage. We're all just globalists with universal rights and identity. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what...
Yeah, that's pretty much what you're saying, everyone. So this is what's coming out of Ottawa. It's not just the Liberals. As Professor Duchesne, he argues in the book, conservatives, at least establishment conservatives, if you're a true conservative out there, we won't include you, but if you're an establishment conservative, you're a globalist as well. And Duchesne backs it up with fact after fact after fact after fact. And so we're going to shift here. We just got 2 more questions. There's a lot of questions and comments. We're going to get to them, and that's going to be the best part. I mentioned we came across something, Professor Duchesne. It's called, I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing it, Clergy Plan, everyone. Yes. And we did a post earlier this week on it. And I'm just going to read a quote from that author. He wrote a book in the beginning of the it was in 1905 or something. He wrote a book on globalism and and the outlook for Europe that we see going on. But this is what he envisioned, everyone. The European man of the future will be of mixed race. Today's races and classes will disappear owing to the disappearing space of nations, time, and prejudice. Eurasian Negroid race of the future, similar in its outward appearance to the ancient Egyptians, will replace the diversity of people of Europe with a diversity of individuals. That sounds exactly what you've been saying is happening to Canada, Professor Duchesne.
Yes. Yes, I would say that the Clergy Plan is a complicated discussion. And in our blog, Council of European Canadians, we have, I think it's a two-part article on this issue of the Clergy Plan that I would ask readers to read if they want to follow through with this topic. I will simply say now that it is quite interesting to have this guy say that the future of Europe will be one in which people will look like Egyptians or will be brown, and there'll be race mix, and there will be a new diversity. It's interesting that he was saying this. When was the year that he said this? Was it?
It was like 1905, 1906.
Okay, so that's way back.
Yeah, way back. And then his, I guess the book spread and apparently got into the hand of Globalists, and they used it.
Yes.
Apparently as a plan going forward.
Right. So I wouldn't say that this was a plan. What we see today, it is all an outcome directly of that plan. Because in my view, there are many factors and movements pushing in this direction, but no one a few decades ago was envisioning what is happening now. As I argue in my book, the more a generation pushes, then the next generation kind of pushes without really seeing what we are witnessing today. They sort of push in a leftist direction, another leftist, and they keep pushing. And the more they push for race mixing, the more they push for diversity. But even in the case of Pierre Trudeau, as I argue in my book, I don't think that if you ask him in the 1970s, look, do you want a Canada in which whites become a complete minority? Is that what you're aiming at? It could not have entered his head, because he was living in 1971 when the Multiculturalism Act was initiated. Canada was 96% white. So in his mind, he could not envision this. It was just like, look, everywhere is white. Come on, guys. It's just a few immigrants that are coming in. He could not envision the anti-white hysteria, the incredible takeover of all the universities by people pushing these ideologies. It gets worse and worse and worse every year. So when I look at the Clergy Plan, I go, wow, this guy kind of saw that in the future, but I wouldn't say he's the guy that orchestrated and planned the whole thing. I would say you have to look at many variables, and they snowball. It was like a snowballing process in which it gets worse and worse and more crazy and irrational. Clergy would probably look at what people are doing today and go, you guys are really crazy. Like, you're actually opening your borders to loads and loads of boats from Africa and just allowing your lands to be Africanized, just like that. So, that's what I would say anyways.
Fair enough. So he probably had some influence. Maybe he planted a seed, that germinated.
Right.
But we will post some stuff on that, more stuff. And I'm going to shift to our last question here, everyone. And then we're going to get to, there's a lot of comments here we're going to get to. I just want to this keeps coming up, Professor Duchesne. There's a myth, a fallacy that's being perpetuated by the mainstream media, by the establishment parties, in the academic world of Canada, that immigration is good for the Canadian economy. And we hear that all the time. And could you comment on that, please?
Well, first, I would say that when you look at Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, European nations, all of them became incredibly wealthy without immigration. All of them. Okay. In the case of Australia and New Zealand, I kind of jumped the gun there, but in the case of New Zealand, Australia, and Canada, of course, there was immigration. But I meant to say, in the case of the Nordic countries and European nations, they became very wealthy, and they were the initiators. Britain was the initiator of the Industrial Revolution. Then France, Germany, and so on. They did all of that without immigration. They did not need diversity for any of that. So in the case of New Zealand, Australia, and so on, there was immigration, although, as I argue in my book, most Canadians were born in Canada. They were not immigrants. And the ones that were so-called immigrants were actually settlers. That's another topic, and people can ask me about that. But what I mean to say is that, first, it is a case that historically most European nations became industrialized and modern without immigration. Secondly, when we look still today at European nations like the Nordic countries, Denmark, they are very wealthy with very small populations. In fact, most of the nations of the world that are wealthy and have a high per capita income are small populated nations like Norway, Finland, Sweden. Now they're getting, Sweden in particular, they're just destroying themselves, and they're getting rapes everywhere. And the welfare costs have gone through the roofs. So that's the first point. I would argue that the people who argue that it is good for the economy, they are right only in the sense that the gross total output, just masses of buyers, real estate everywhere, like in China, is good, right? Like you have these huge mega cities with hordes of people in them, that's good. The globalists don't like good, peaceful, prosperous, wealthy small towns and small cities. That's not what they want. They want genetic corporations with genetic identities spreading everywhere, big name corporations, and they dominate the market, and they make global profits. And they want masses of consumers just purchasing what they sell. Consumers who are ruthless, who have no sense of identity. They don't know who they are. They came from somewhere. They have no sense of being rooted in any land. That's what they want. You can manipulate them, control them, and sell them all kinds of goods. Sell them drugs because their brains are all warped. They when you don't know who you are, you're looking for meaning, for some sense of identity. You purchase a pharmaceutical drug, so the pharmaceutical companies are just selling drugs like crazy. So that's what they want. They want the West to look like a gigantic Chinese, Indian city, but in this case, it will be totally mongrelized. So you can imagine that's the world they envision, with these George Soros elites at the top controlling everything and everyone.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I don't mean what you're saying is crazy, but the outcome is crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. Hopefully everyone heard that. Wow. That's unbelievable. That pretty much sums it all up. And we're going to get to some questions now. I'm just going to go down here. A lot of positive feedback. Keep up the great work. People from the United States on tonight. There's a question here. Is what the UN and George Soros and the Liberal Democrats are doing, is that going to cause a war? Someone asked. I guess some kind of world war.
Yes, I mean, it's it's gonna
There's
create.
the question there.
All right, yeah. So it's gonna create a lot of friction. There is no doubt about it. Um, I mean, they're counting on the fact that whites by themselves somehow create violence. It's a crazy ideology that whites are kind of bad people if you leave them by themselves. If you bring diversity, everything becomes peaceful. We get along and we love each other. That's their philosophical message. It is going to be the opposite. You look at history, Norway, Finland, France, Britain, Canada, United States, very peaceful among their own white communities, very low crime rates. Once you bring all kinds of people from all over the world, tensions arise. People are not as adjusted, and the crime rates go up. So, yes, in that sense, I see civil war, not war, but civil war
Good point.
in the Western world.
Yeah, and you're not the only one. There's a lot of people that are predicting that first in Europe, right? Depending what happens. So these will be Professor Duchesne. These will be globalists, nationalists, radical left fighting.
Yes,
Is that what you see?
yes, I do see in the end a civil war across the Western world in Europe. The Islamicists siding with the leftists, or the leftists siding with them. All kinds of racial tensions in the United States, Hispanics, leftists, and non-whites ganging up together against the whites that support people like Trump. So yeah, that's what I envision.
Okay. Okay. So we're going to shift here. I'm going to show you. We had someone who is looks like someone indoctrinated by the globalists on tonight. So I'll just show some of the commentary,
All
and
right.
you can comment. So here, this person here, she's going wholeless, heartless. She's saying it's heartless because we're thinking of our own people before others. Do you see that?
Oh, so she.
Yeah, she's criticizing. She's saying, "Oh, you guys are heartless."
Yeah, well,
So she's. You see what I'm saying? I'll show you another one. Oh, you guys don't have any empathy, right? She's going.
yeah, that's an.
Yeah, you see the globalist say her, look, and then she goes sad display. That's all she can say, right?
Yeah, that's all she can say. They have no fact,
Yeah.
no reason, no arguments. It's all playing on emotions. You can be sure that these people really haven't done much for anyone else. It's just a propaganda way of advancing the diversity program. You look at these Hollywood star millionaires who say open the borders. Many of them are childless. They don't even have children, but supposedly they really love children. Many of them are drug addicts and so on. Like this guy, the brother of Jane Fonda, saying that the son of Melania Trump should be put into a cage with pedophiles. That's the mindset of these so-called people who have empathy. They love everyone, but at the same time, they say, just put that child with pedophiles. So I don't take that seriously. It's a fake form of empathy. It's a form of empathy that is devoid of a sense of dignity and loyalty. In the past, throughout history, no person will be respected if you're disloyal to your own people. That is a violation of a basic moral principle. So yes, we Canadians and Europeans have always shown a lot of concern for the rest of the world, but they now have taken advantage of that. It is like, to me, when people talk about this, it's like someone screams out to you as you're walking on the street. A female screams out to you and says, help, help, I'm being assaulted. Someone has a knife on my back, and you go and help them, and then they put the knife on your back and ask for your money. That's the kind of empathy they're talking about. You have to be realistic and show true empathy, and it starts with your own people.
Yeah, and here's this look. She brings up the racist card. See that? This is racist drivel. That's all she can say, right? There's no
She has
constructive
a lot of
argument.
hatred in her heart. It's just hatred.
So would she be just a product of the manipulation from the federal government, the mainstream media,
Yeah.
into these so-called universal human individual values? Would you say that like this person is just
Lots of
is she just floating, like what you were saying before, someone who has no identity?
yeah, she is just a typical SJW person repeating what she hears on the media all day long. She doesn't have any thoughts of her own. She's confused. I mean, some of them are naive, and you can sort of try and be understanding and say, look, it's not their fault. They're confused. They have the minds of children. But if you put these people, I don't know what is her ethnicity. If she's a white person, if you put her to live in an area that is full of immigrants, she would change her mind, because not because the immigrants are bad per se. It's just because it's a different culture. She would hear different messages, different music. They will not identify with her.
Exactly. And it could be worse than that, right? Depending on who's living there, because there's radicals in all groups, right?
Yeah.
So this is William Smith. He says the death of a country, its cultural traditions, languages, all wiped out. So I guess he's talking about the globalism agenda. Professor Duchesne, loss of freedoms, political correctness, will and is wiping out free speech.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, we saw with this person when she says this is racist, that is an attack on freedom of speech. Because if you are racist, by their own definition, you should not have a right to speak. So it's a way of saying, I have labeled you as being this kind of deplorable person, therefore you can't speak. So it's a way of silencing people. And that's illiberal. It's important to emphasize that is illiberal. I am a liberal. She's not a liberal. The people who use that word racist are not liberal.
Yeah, someone wrote this. I'm not familiar with this guy, Paul Frum, and his organization. Are you familiar with that?
I heard of his name, Paul Frum.
Okay.
But I mean, I'm not for sure who he is.
All right. So Christina, I know she's from the Maritimes. She agreed. This is exactly what they're doing in the UK. This is very real, and it's happening right now. So she gets it.
Yeah, smart.
Yeah, and here's this other lady again. We're going to go back just to show what some of these people are like who are indoctrinated, in our opinion. Again, she goes, "You all don't believe in human rights." Isn't that universal human rights, eh? Just like you were saying, Professor Duchesne.
Yeah, and let me clarify that issue.
Yeah.
Let me clarify that issue. Actually, I believe in human rights insofar as I believe in the rights of foreigners to certain things that human beings get. So let's say, for example, in Afghanistan, women are not allowed to get an education. They're being raped. I believe that Canada should speak out against it. But I don't believe that that means that Canada should open its borders to Afghanistan. They're two different things. This person doesn't even know what human rights is. Human rights was invented by whites. Let that be clear. It was not invented by Africans. It was not invented by Muslims. It was not invented by Chinese. So she is using a white concept. She's saying, oh, I believe in human rights. She's using a white concept, and she should know that. And I believe in the rights of other people. But if she followed the argument, what we are saying is that human rights in your own country, in the sense that you shouldn't be tortured, we don't want to see people tortured anywhere in the world. It doesn't mean we want to have the whole world come to Canada.
Yeah, exactly. Here's William Smith again. He said, globalist rights, not the right into the country, same as U.S. lawyers giving rights to illegal aliens.
Right. That's what we're saying.
Yeah. So, yeah, he's distinguishing national rights versus globalist rights.
Yeah.
It seems, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And open borders. So yeah, he's seeing what's going on, and he's saying then he goes rights for citizens
Yeah.
versus legal migrants, Professor Duchesne, versus permanent residents. We got to stand up for our own people. I think that's what he's saying.
Right. I mean, that
Yeah,
makes sense. You have citizen rights for your own citizens, the basic rights we all have, and then you can have human rights outside for everyone, but not inside your nation.
yeah, exactly. Here's Kathy. She loves everything you're saying,
All right. That's
Kathy. Yeah. So she gets it. Here's Suzanne. She says, "What human rights would the legals have when citizens stop paying their taxes?" Because basically, what's happening, like the majority of hardworking Canadians are paying for all these illegal migrants,
right.
right? So
Ultimately,
she's saying, what rights would they have if we stop paying?
yeah, there is a cost, and somebody's paying for this.
Yes.
Yes.
So yeah. Um, yeah, this guy he responded to that globalist. He said it is not the right of anyone in the world to be a Canadian citizen. He gets it. Adam gets it.
Okay.
It is disturbing that people bring human rights into this. He gets it. If you come to Canada, you should be checked out and have something to offer and a skill. So he's basically saying, don't let the radicals in. Don't let these people exploiting our country in. If you come here, you have something to contribute to our prosperity.
Yes,
Yeah.
this brings a point that I am not against immigration per se. I would want to cut it drastically. I would want
Yes.
it to be 50,000 per
Right.
year,
Right.
and we would choose whoever we want. But that doesn't mean I don't want any immigrants. So when they say
Right.
that we are
Right.
immigrants, they're just lying.
Exactly.
We are saying that we have a right to decide how many we want and which immigrants we want.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we say too, Professor Duchesne. Jim says globalism is death.
Yes, globalism is bad.
Bad. Um, this guy, Christina, she apparently says George Soros was involved in rounding up Jews for the Nazis. I can't confirm that, but
Yeah, I mean, I heard things like that.
you did.
Um, but, I don't get too much into all kinds of discussions about Jews and Nazis because I
Mm-hmm.
sidetracks from what we are trying to say.
Yeah, fair enough. This person, Nathan's asking, are you finding any interest with the Quebec La Mute movement? We haven't reached out to them ourselves, Nathan. We support some of their agenda. They have a specific mission. We're open to individuals joining us, but we're not associated working with La Mute. But we are sympathetic to their concerns over immigration and what it's doing to Quebec, but also to the rest of Canada. I'm
Yeah,
going to keep. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, no, I have not been in contact with this group.
Yeah,
Although,
they're kind of far right and they're very anti-immigration. What's going on? I wouldn't call them anti-immigrant because that's going too far. But I think they're opposing the globalism and the mass immigration, and they're very outspoken on that one issue.
okay, no, I don't.
Yeah, and they're very active in Quebec.
Yeah. So I'm going to show this book for your audience.
Sure.
This book, that is a bestseller. It has been a bestseller in Amazon Canada. You can check it out. It has been ranked almost consistently #1 in Canadian politics since it was released in August of 2017. So I would encourage the listeners to purchase it. I explain at length a lot of the things we have talked about. I try to make it as readable and for a wide audience, but it is, I try to also support the arguments I make with elaborated statistics and sources and so on. But it is still, in my view, readable, so I would encourage you to purchase it. All right.
Yep. I've read that book. I've purchased that book. It's a fantastic book, and it's actually helped our policies and our ideas and vision. So we congratulate you for that. It is an academic book, everyone, and so you're going to have to, it's not like you're picking up some romance novel, right? You got to use your brain when you read it. He makes a lot. Professor Duchesne makes a lot of important, subtle arguments that you got to be aware of. So hopefully this discussion today will help you.
Yes.
With that book, it's definitely compared to other academic books, it's definitely approachable. I'm going to get to this question here. I'm going to try and get through as many as possible. Does Immigration Canada, Professor Duchesne, discriminate against European people who would like to move to Canada? Why do they select only from Asian African countries? Are there fewer applicants from Europe? Why are these quotas not made transparent to Canadians? So we're just going to wait for Professor Duchesne. This is a good question. It's getting into the immigration numbers. He's asking if there's discrimination against Europeans wanting to immigrate to Canada now. Why do they only select from Asian African countries? Are there fewer applicants from Europe? Why are these quotas not made more transparent to Canadians?
What I would say to that question is that there is no doubt that most immigrants are coming from outside Europe. I don't know whether they are really simply excluding Europeans and wanting only people from Asia and Africa and so on, but I would say that they do want diversity. I would say that the left would not want to see immigrants coming from Europe. They would think, okay, the country is going to stay white, and they don't want that. So they are welcoming people from Asia, from Africa, and Latin America with earnest. But I don't know that they are specifically excluding people from Europe.
Okay, fair enough. But we do know they're letting lots of immigrants in from India, from Pakistan, from the Middle East.
Yeah.
From Africa, from Asia, right?
Yeah.
The numbers are there, everyone. Just go look up the immigration numbers, and
I discuss all this.
Yeah.
In the book.
I think they break them down. You can see the foreign funding broken down too online.
The top 5 countries, the top 5 sources of immigrants, the top 5 nations in the last 20 or so years are China, India, Philippines, some Islamic countries, Pakistan. So these are the top countries, sources, and they tend to shift a little bit as to who is in first place. You will be surprised, but a lot of people are coming from the Philippines too.
Yes, exactly. I'm not familiar with this question. COINTELPRO. Have you heard of that, Professor Duchesne? We're going to look that up.
No, I don't know about that.
Yeah, so we're going to look that up, Pearl, and then provide some kind of feedback on that. Pearl says there's organized gang stalking is rampant in Canada, and I know there's increasing these grooming gangs that we see in Europe are occurring here, Professor Duchesne.
Yes, I don't know about much about gang organization in Canada. What I would say, and this is what to me is important, is that ethnic groups, when they come in large numbers, when large numbers of people come from China, from Saudi Arabia, from Pakistan, Philippines, they stick with their own. They form ethnic enclaves. Anybody who has traveled in Toronto, particularly in certain regions, you see this region is heavily Indian. This region is heavily Chinese. This one is heavily some Philippine. That's what happens. They form their own groups. They hire themselves. They're not obligated, by the way, when they open their own shops, they're not obligated to meet diversity quotas. If you're Pakistani and every worker you hire is Pakistani, that's really diverse. If you are, German, however, and you hire only Germans, that's not diverse. That's bad. You gotta hire diversity there. So these ethnic enclaves are worlds unto themselves, increasingly so. That's what I would emphasize, rather than just gangs of criminals. I think it's these ethnic enclaves that have grown a lot. And I talk about that in the book. I bring up some statistics of how much the ethnic enclaves have grown in Canada in the last 20 years.
Yeah, and they're growing every day, every year, everyone.
Yeah.
And they will eventually lead to everyone what's called no-go zones.
Right.
And right now in Europe, the last I saw, there's over 900 no-go zones across Europe, and it's probably over 1,000 now. Yeah. And you can do your own research on it, but they're all over Europe. So these are like ethnic enclaves, and if you're white, you cannot go in them without putting yourself in harm's way.
Yeah.
So we're going to shift to this question. Marie, she says, why is it then that certain Islamic countries don't accept those immigrants? How about China or Japan? Not loads of boats arriving there either. So she's talking about all these refugees.
Right.
So around Syria, you got all these Islamic countries and they don't accept any.
Yes. And that's a question I address in the book.
Do you want to comment on that now, or?
Yes, that's a question I address in the book. Why is it that only European countries and only European or white countries seem to be obligated to accept immigrants from the rest of the world? There are no immigrants going to Japan, to China, to Mexico, to Honduras, to anywhere outside the Western world. So when you ask that question, why only in the West, you can start getting a lot of answers, because it's important to understand that diversity is not just happening in Canada. There are many accounts about why diversity is happening in Canada that are flawed, because the people assume that multiculturalism is unique to Canada. Therefore, let me find an explanation that explains how it came to be that way in Canada. Well, no, it has to be an explanation that explains why Canada, why Australia, why New Zealand, why France, why Britain, why Sweden, why Germany. And once you think of this question that way, you can get the answers. And the answers are many, but you can combine them together. And what I would say is that after the Second World War, there is this insane idea that whites cannot be in their own homelands by themselves, because that's racist. They need to have people from all over the world, and then whites finally fulfill some plan that God or someone mandated, that they need to be mixed with all kinds of people, and this is going to be an utopia, and we're going to get along, and it's going to be kumbaya, dancing around, and white are just bad people. So really something like that is going on. Yeah,
excellent point there. Here's this is a good one here, and this is being perpetuated in the indoctrination. This guy Nick says we are known for our tolerance, so they're pushing inclusion, intolerance. These are some of the buzzwords. Diversity. But, we argue, Professor Duchesne, that if you stand for something, if you stand for some values, principles, beliefs, you have to have some form of intolerance. Otherwise, you don't stand for anything.
Right.
So the globalist agenda is pushing oh, we're tolerant of everything. This is pure globalist agenda, isn't it?
Yes. And the thing is, they are not tolerant of everything. That's what they say, but they're not
Right,
tolerant of everything.
right.
They are tolerant only of those who support diversity. I experienced that in my career. The moment I began to question this diversification program, people became very intolerant towards me. They cut me off. I, however, on the other hand, would talk to them. So I think I'm far more tolerant. And my experience is the people I have met on our side, like you and many others, just by sensing them, they are far more tolerant. They love to talk about these issues. They love to engage, even people that disagree with them.
Yeah.
They don't say, oh, get away from here. Oh, I'm just going to kick you out. You're just the devil. And so they say, look, you don't understand the issues. You may be naive, but we don't say we're going to shut you down. We say, let's engage with these issues and let's talk about them. So we are far more tolerant than they are.
Yeah, so would you consider this double speak?
Yeah, it's double speak.
Hypocrisy.
Deception.
Yeah, deception, everyone. And just remember, if you stand for something, you have to be intolerant. Otherwise, you don't stand for anything.
Yeah, you have to discriminate.
You have to. If you have any core values, beliefs, principles, when they're getting violated, that's when you're intolerant.
Right. Otherwise,
you see a woman getting beat up?
Yeah.
Are you just going to be tolerant? Come on, let's all wake up. Right. So we're going to get here. Here's another one. This is Pearl. She's from the U.S., I would gather, but it applies to us. She says America has bigger issues, bigger problems to tackle, and one is homelessness. Why accept more refugees and non-documented? Just saying. And she's right.
Yeah.
And basically, Shane, why not put your people first? We have lots of homeless. Yeah. We have veterans on the street. We have many seniors below the poverty line. And yet these globalists, they turn around and say we're racist.
Yeah, the whole thing is really very strange when you realize that the number of homeless people in the United States is very high, and that they would think that they need to spend billions on illegal immigrants when they could deal with this. It shows again that morality really starts in your home, among your people. It doesn't start with strangers and outsiders.
Excellent point. Excellent point. And Shane said he could see this coming. When I was a teen back in the 80s, I thought I'd be dead before it became full blown, but now it's happened so fast for him.
Yeah.
Professor, it's moving so fast. There's so many tentacles, everyone. And they've done the work, like in the academia, they've done it in our educational institutions, they've done it through the legislation, through the charter. They're doing it through the mainstream media, constant indoctrination. Right, Professor Duchesne?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
They done this through every means and institution that they can. There is this term that was invented by the left. It's called slow march through the institutions. And what they mean by that is they're going to take over culturally the churches, the schools, the families, the media, every institution, so that they all think in the same way that diversity is the best thing that we can do.
Sure. Yeah. Here's Pearl again. This is a good point, Professor. She says, we don't have a government. We are the enemy. By human rights advocate Deborah Tavares. It applies there to, in America, Stephen Shellen, Canadian targeted individual. Yeah, those are only some examples. They're across the board everywhere. So this is anyone who poses the globalist agenda, right? They're immediately perceived as an enemy.
Yeah, that's what they call. It's amazing. They call people who are loyal to their own nation enemy, people who stand by their own people enemy. But what they mean is we are enemy to the globalists who are in control. That's what's going on.
Yeah, here's this. I'll just touch on this. I think Maria Josie, she was echoing what you were saying. We actually believe in human rights. That's fine. That all people have the right to be well treated by their so-called governments in their land of birth. Why we need to flee your own land, to me, that is the root of the problem.
Right.
Immigration should be made in a clear, open conscience that you will be joining another culture studied before, and you accept to adopt another way of life and not arrive here to dictate your beliefs on others. Then you become a dictator. But we would argue, Professor Duchesne, the government is encouraging this.
Yes, and the thing is, she is right. She is
very good, isn't it?
Yeah, she's right to start by saying we actually believe in human rights. As I said before, I have no problems with the human rights of foreigners in their own lands. But the way the left has misappropriated this concept to mean that everyone on the outside should have the same rights that you have as a citizen. That doesn't make any sense. There are billions of people out there. Are you going to say, look, let's be real here. Big stars, these wealthy stars and Democrats who oppose what's happening in the United States with the Trump administration. If you said, by the way, all these illegals are going to be housed around your house. We're going to set up these makeshift homes, tents, just around your homes. And we're going to have to send it to the schools that your children go. They'll change their minds in a second. It's because it's all virtue signaling from high above without having to pay a price. You want to act like you're moral because these people are incredibly corrupt and decadent. They live lifestyles that most human beings don't live. They have many homes. So they just want to pontificate upon ordinary peoples. They throw all these immigrants into working class neighborhoods and to their schools. So they don't see it. They don't pay the price for it. And then call the white working class immigrants who are bothered by this. They say, oh, you're just bigoted and racist. But believe me, the moment you take even the legal immigrants, you take all these immigrants and place them in public housings around their own homes, they'll change their minds in a second.
Yeah, fair enough. Excellent point. And here's Rodina. She gets it. How about human rights of our own Canadians? The right of veterans to get healthcare, housing, not to have to live on the street. What about the rest of our homeless?
Yeah.
We can't even tend to their needs. Yet our idiot leader, I wouldn't call him a leader, everyone. How about Puppet? Wants to bring in all these foreigners and give them a monthly check plus healthcare and housing. This is so maddening. But Rodina, this has been going on for decades. And it's not just this government. There was historic mass immigration in the previous government. Right? So don't think it's just Trudeau.
Yeah.
But it is maddening what's going on. This mass immigration is violates who we are as Canadians. It violates our homeland. It violates our values, our culture, our heritage, our identity. It is everything upside down.
Yeah, the Trudeau Justin, of course, is the extreme version of all of this. He's like, as she said, he really is an idiot. And it is maddening because he's so extremist in his views.
Yeah, fair enough. Go ahead.
In a way, it is good because he has crystallized some of these issues.
Yeah. Good point there, Professor Duchesne. It's bringing it to the forefront, isn't it? But people need to see beyond it. They have to realize that there's an establishment behind it.
Yeah.
If they only think it's Trudeau, then they're just getting played, right?
Oh yeah, they get played because they think that you just have to change Justin and then
and everything will be great. But then they'll just keep doing this behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you know this person, but Pearl, she talks about Dr. Matthew Aaron. He's Canadian. He's been targeted, and he's been under illegal surveillance by the government. But that's not surprising, is it?
Yeah, I don't know about this individual.
Yeah. But that's not surprising, is it? They have mass surveillance in Canada.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's the way
They
it is.
don't want to talk about it, but it's going on, everyone.
Right.
Christina, this is a bit off topic. She's talking about 5G targeted individual stuff. All the mass surveillance. That's just part of, you could argue, just a tentacle globalist agenda right now, right? To control people and to watch them.
Yeah, I don't know about this gang.
Yeah, fair enough. That's something that can be looked up. I'll take note of his name and see if I can dig up anything. Let me just get through.
Yeah, there's some comments. I'm just reading some of the comments myself.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm just trying. Oh, here it is. Cointel. They said it's a counterintelligence program, aka MK Ultra Look. Um, Canadian actor Stephen Shellen said he's a targeted individual. We'll look into that, Pearl. Thank you for sharing that. Oh, yeah. We're doing the best we can, Pearl, about Agenda 21, global genocide program. You obviously know about this type of stuff, Professor
Yeah.
Duchesne.
Someone wrote an article for my website about the Agenda 21. I think if you Google that in the search engine, you'll get to it.
And this person, she says, what's happening in Canada is Agenda 21 all the way. Yeah, it appears that way, Rodina. And we've posted stuff on Agenda 21, and it may even go beyond Agenda 21. Rodina, if you go back and review what we discussed, it's they're basically altering Canada in a very sick, evil way. That's what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're also involved in this. They're not the only group, but they're involved in this.
Sure, exactly. This woman talks about gangs. I guess that's just a byproduct, maybe, of the mass immigration.
Yeah,
He's getting a lot of hate in the schools, Professor Duchesne. He's 18 years old, so he must be, let's say he's in grade 12.
Yeah, it depends. Like you have to get more details, but it could be that he may be one of a few remaining whites in a totally diversified high school, because this is going to happen in the future. That you will have white students a minority, and this is already happening in a few high schools and primary schools. You have to go to the primary schools to witness the future of Canada. In the primary school, you see that whites are, in many of them, are just a minority. And once that is the case, it'll just be outright condemnation. They'll be completely subdued. If they ever say anything that bespeaks of their identity as Euro-Canadians, they'll be trashed and beaten up. So this is going to get really bad. I mean, look at what South Africa, what is happening to the white minority there. They're getting exterminated.
Yeah, excellent point. Excellent point. This is what's coming, everyone. And would you say these kids are the kids that are being violent, intolerant? Are they just indoctrinated, brainwashed into just kicking down the Euro Canadians?
Oh yes, I mean, when you read the textbooks, if the textbooks are saying the whites who created Canada, the first thing they did was to genocide the indigenous peoples, you're saying right off the bat, they have no legitimacy to this nation.
Sure. Okay. This is Christina. She says the globalists are making us the bad guys to divert attention from themselves.
Right.
So distraction, right? And they want, see, this is something we've been dealing with, because there's certain groups that get caught up in it, Professor Duchesne. They start hating all Muslims.
Yeah.
and then they become a problem. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So some people get kind of they can't see the big picture, and then they get drawn in, and it's only feeding the globalist agenda.
Right. The globalist
Right.
agenda, they want to see whites go crazy and violent and so on, so that they can paint them in the stereotype or stereotypical way they want us to be painted.
Yeah, and that's the worst thing anyone could be doing. You're helping the globalists,
Yeah, you don't. You have to avoid playing up to their stereotypes.
and you can't get caught up in these tentacles, whether it's Islam or some other thing.
Yeah.
Uh, Pearl, she's actually from Australia. That's where her comments were coming from.
All right, that's far from there. Yeah, I was
Yeah,
in Australia a few years ago.
she's talking about the Matis, the 1%. They're probably connected to the globalists.
Yeah, I don't know much about them.
We're almost finished here, Professor Duchesne.
Yeah, yeah, because I have something
Yeah,
to go there. So, but anyway, we can stay a few more minutes.
yeah, okay. Yeah, and this person says, don't forget the seniors who've worked and paid taxes all their lives. Excellent point, Cynthia. They're getting railroaded. They're
Mhm.
absolutely getting railroaded.
Yes,
Disgusting. And that's
and
an excellent point. They've worked all their lives, they paid taxes all their lives, and now they're kicked to the side.
right, and it's not gonna be a good situation for seniors later on when they have people taking care of them that don't have any sense of attachment with their culture.
Yeah. And here's Betty. She's saying he's just a puppet of Soros, Trudeau, Obama, Hillary Clinton are all involved with this. She calls it a New World Order agenda. But it's beyond them, isn't it, Professor Duchesne? It's not just liberals in this country. The whole establishment is in on this, everyone.
Yes, and Trump challenged that establishment.
Yes.
That's why he's vilified, because he challenged the establishment, and they hate him for that. So in a sense, he's good for us.
Yes, he is, because he's fighting a lot of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the new world. Look what's happening. Reese is talking about look what's happening in the UK. People are getting arrested for speaking now. You can just look at Tommy Robinson,
Right.
and
This is
now he's locked up in jail. This is all insane, but this is the way they're just cracking down, right?
yeah.
This is only going to increase, wouldn't it, Professor Duchesne?
Oh yes, it's gonna. They are realizing that they're implementing a program that people don't want and don't like. So they're criminalizing opposition to the program. This is what is happening nowadays in Britain. In Facebook, you can be criminally charged if you say things that are perceived to be against Islamic peoples. So if
Yeah.
you say, "Look, we have enough Muslims here. I don't want any more Muslims," that's criminalized. It's just insane. So Tommy Robinson is very important in the sense that he now represents a challenge to this whole criminalization of dissent.
Yeah, and here's Betty again. She said it all starts. She goes on about the Queen of England. She's a globalist. In all the elites, Canada is finished if we don't get Trudeau out. But she's wrong. Just replacing Trudeau is not the answer. They can put another globalist puppet in. He
Oh
is
yeah,
replaceable. You gotta realize that. Otherwise, you're getting played back and forth. And
yeah.
and Professor Duchesne documents this. The establishment conservatives are just as globalist as establishment liberals. Don't get fooled. Read his book.
Yeah, that's right. So
Yeah.
the conservatives, starting with Mulroney from the early 1980s all the way through the Harper years, they brought more immigrants than anyone had done before. They consistently raised the number of immigrants, or at least they kept it very high at 250, close to 300,000 per year during that entire period from the early 1990s all the way to the time that Justin. Then Justin came and he increased the numbers even more, because we know Justin, that's how he is. But it's not something that he started. The conservatives prided themselves. They said, look, we bring more immigrants than the liberals. And so, yeah, they will do the same thing.
Yeah.
They're good in the sense that they put more restrictions on potentially criminal immigrants, on radical Islamicists. They put a few more restrictions. But overall, they have no problem with the complete diversification of Canada.
Yeah. And that's the truth, everyone. I just want to get back to this quickly. She says, don't get caught up in Islam. It's taking over the world. That's their agenda. I don't think that's accurate, is it? There's a lot of people that are worried about the Islamization of the world.
Yeah, I mean,
I think they're getting distracted. Because Islam is being used by the globalists to divide us.
Right, it's being used.
But people latch on to the Islam and say, "Oh, it's taking over the world." But what's taking over the world are the globalists.
Yeah,
is that correct?
Islam is a pawn in the globalist agenda. They're not the main culprit. I mean, after all, there would be no Muslims here unless we had open borders. It's not like they forced themselves onto the West. The West invited them.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to ask yourself, who invited them?
Yep, fair enough. I'll just yeah, and she's right. She says Trump has been a setback for the global agenda big time.
Oh yeah.
But he's only one. He's only one leader, one president, one country, albeit the mightiest economic country in the world, the mightiest military country in the world.
Yeah, but he is important. I mean,
yes.
Imagine if we had Hillary Clinton in power. Trump really made everything so much better, and the tweets he writes continuously challenging them, mocking them. It's great. I mean, I'm really glad he's there in power.
Yeah, exactly. She says we have no more privacy.
Yeah, that's coming too. Yeah.
Yeah. And this woman goes on about the Illuminati globalists are working together for the same globalist dictatorship. We're at the top. At the top in charge will be the few wealthy top 1%. The rest of the peasant will serve the globalist slaves, in other words.
Yeah, I mean, this is what's going on. One of the things we need to understand is that we are neither right nor left, in the sense that we understand that there are very, very powerful corporations, business people at the top who are pushing for this as well. This is not just leftist academics,
exactly,
individuals. It's powerful economic forces that make a lot of money from this globalization or globalism.
Right.
Yeah. It's
Betty says here that we have it worse since Trudeau came in.
Yeah.
But they got to realize he is connected to everything before.
Yeah.
You can't just isolate him.
Right.
And then you're just falling into the trap of getting played. Right? They'll just put another globalist puppet in, and they'll just keep pushing the same overall agenda. So this is more on the Illuminati, globalists, and that type of thing. It says here, Betty says, it's true. It's going to be the only religion because they believe in beheading. Well, yeah, like I said, we don't want people getting caught. People should take the radical Islam serious, but we're recommending don't get so obsessed with it. Don't get caught up into hating all Muslims, because then you're going to be part of the problem.
Right. Yeah.
Do you want to add anything in closing here, Professor Duchesne?
Yes. What I would add is that you have to ask yourself, why is it wrong for a Euro-Canadian, for a person from British ancestry, or Swedish ancestry, why is it wrong for them to have a sense of identity and pride in their nation without diversity? Why is it that they must have diversity for them to have pride in their own nation? So it doesn't make sense. You're saying that your nation is not good enough unless there are less people that look like you and that are born in your nation. It makes no sense. That they're saying you should be prouder and prouder the more your nation is inhabited by people from outside nations. Now look, these other nations, India, China, they're intact. They're going to retain their identity. They're going to retain their culture. It's only the West that is going to be totally eradicated and ruthless. So they're laughing. The Chinese leaders, the leaders from Mexico, India, they're laughing. They're saying, look at them. They're self-destructing. And we're going to push for that because that's in our interest. It's going to increase our power. The more Mexicans there are in the United States, the more Mexico has an influence on the United States. And who knows whether the Aztec nation, Aztlan, what is it called? Aztlan, in the southern western side of the United States, like New Mexico, California, all these states begin to gravitate towards Mexico. So they look forward to that. So people that are of Euro-Canadian descent have to realize that if you don't have a place, a land that you can claim as your own, a culture, a heritage, you're lost. They're coming after you. You're lost.
Yeah, excellent point, Professor Duchesne. Unfortunately, this has been going on for decades, everyone. There's so much that has to be undone, rescinded, starting with the Charter. The Charter has this globalist agenda written right into it. There's so much legislation that has to be rescinded. But at the end of the day, everyone, we need to rise up as Canadians and boot out these globalists. They are destroying our country. They're in the federal government. They're in the mainstream media. They're working in provincial governments, municipal governments. They're in academia. They're in our educational institutions. And then there's a mass of Canadians who are brainwashed, indoctrinated. That's what we're facing. But we need to rise up and boot these people out. Otherwise, it's going to get very ugly here, and we will head for civil conflict, as Professor Duchesne predicted for Europe. That's where we're going. But you need to be able to get through the doublespeak, the indoctrination that's constant coming out of the government in the mainstream media. You got to see between the lines, the doublespeak, like stuff like immigration is good for the economy. That's what the establishment conservatives are saying. You got to see through that rhetoric. It's just perpetuating myths. Canada is a country of immigrants. That myth, you got to be able to see it. So hopefully tonight, this will help everyone. Share our message tonight. The purpose tonight was to inform Canadians and also our fellow Westerners from other countries. And thank you for joining us tonight. But we got to keep informing and speaking and standing up. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, we got to do all those things, everyone, or it's going to be very ugly here. Very ugly. More and more.
Yes. I think I sense a bit of a momentum on the part of Canadians against.
It's tough, though, because it's so entrenched here, everyone. Because we're dealing with the entire establishment, which is all globalists. That's what we're up against.
Yeah, but the people, ordinary people, their instincts tell them something is wrong.
Right. So excellent, everyone. We've been going for 2 hours. We are human beings at the end of the day. I wish I could go all night. I'm sure Professor Duchesne wishes he could go all night. But there is 2 hours of content. Please share it. Please go back and watch it. And And we look forward to having you on again, Professor Duchesne. Excellent. I really appreciate everything you shared.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Again, here is the book that people can read. I appreciate the chance to speak to your audience, and maybe we can do it another time.
Excellent stuff. I want to wish everyone a good night. Excellent comments and questions tonight, everyone. And thank you for joining us.
Okay, bye, everyone.
Bye.